Welcome to the Long Take Review, a film podcast with one eye always on the Oscar race. I'm your host, Jen Subchakshai Banker, and I'm here with a friend who carries a different handgun to match every outfit. It's Greg Cass. How's it going, Greg?
Oh, I'm so good. Thank you for sending over all those beautiful dresses and handguns. I'm really all set for the fall season, which is my way to cover
patterns.
up. No patterns.
No patterns.
I also don't look good in blue, so you've really taken care of me. So,
and now we've made this creepy. So we are here today to review Priscilla, a film by Sofia Coppola that Greg actually had recommended in absentia in our Thanksgiving episode. And so PTI and I, kind of having not seen the movie at that point, had to sort of just guess why you were recommending it. So the film is based on Priscilla Presley's memoir, Elvis and Me, and stars Cailee Spaeny as Priscilla and Jacob Elordi as Elvis. So all you Jacob Elordi fans, listen up. It's playing in theaters now, and since it's distributed by A24, they don't really have a consistent deal with a streaming service, so it's unclear where that's going to pop up later. Could be Paramount Plus, Max, Apple TV Plus. That's where some of the past A24 films have ended up. So
what that really means is it will be on Canopy eventually. I'm going to get more people on the Canopy train.
Your Canopy agenda.
The library, the public library or academic library streaming service has a long, old-standing deal with A24, and they get every single A24 release for free later than other services, but it does get there. So, hey, shout out Canopy for just nailing a studio to a really good deal a long time ago. Everything Everywhere just got there. So that shows you how long it takes.
Oh, nice.
But it is fantastic. So there's my plug for Canopy.
There you go. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because that does not come up when you Google when is Priscilla going to be on streaming, which is literally what I did earlier today. Or like, where do A24 films end up? Canopy does not pop up in the Google search. All right. If you are listening to us for the first time, we'll have a spoiler-free section. And actually, we're going to try to stretch the spoiler-free section a little bit longer today. So we'll probably be closer to 45 to 50 minutes instead of 30 to 40 minutes. And we're going to design that for those who have not yet seen the film. And then we will very clearly announce when we're going to shift into spoiler mode for the rest of the show. So, Greg, if folks stick around and want to listen to more of our reviews, how can they do that?
Jen, I am so glad you asked. If listeners don't want to miss new episodes when they drop, the best thing to do is to follow the Long Take Review wherever you get your podcasts. Subscribe, drop a rating, let them know that, and by them I mean the algorithm, know that you love us and continue to follow our show. We host the main feed on Substack, which you can find on Jen's review page, but you can also find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Overcast, and more. And hey, even though PT's not here and he does all the work on this part, why don't you give us a follow on Instagram and Threads to see his delicious web comments and content, and every once in a while a meme, and every once in a while just making fun of one of the two of us. So please give us a follow, all those places.
He has been bringing his A game, like the Thanksgiving basically like looks like a meme with our logo on it. I thought it was great. Also, film community on Threads heating up. I don't know if you've seen this, but there's been a big push this week to sort of bring back, because honestly, that's what was making me hang on to Twitter for as long as I did, was all the film critics, because that seems to be the default social media platform where all the film critics hang out. And so the fact that more of them were sort of like, hey, let's get this going. Let's network and follow each other. And it was a really fun set of kind of share your favorite movie questions going around yesterday. So that was great. So yeah, we will be on there.
It helps that a lot of the studios have now abandoned X, formerly Twitter. So I think they're getting more active on some of the kind of, look, we can be cynical and say it's all just marketing, which it is, but it's really great to scroll through your feed and pause and see like a little, quick trailer or scene from the Marvels or what have you. So it's exciting to see Threads really building. I don't know. I don't do tech, but it seems like Threads is starting to pull ahead of Blue Sky and some of those other pretenders, for better or worse. That seems to be my new home, at least too. So
yeah, no, for sure. We shall see. All right, we are just about ready to get into our review of Priscilla, but first we need to do a quick movie news check-in.
Just in off the wire, it's your Hollywood news.
It's still so
Who is that
good.
guy? I like the cut of his jib. That guy sounds cool. As I confessed on Instagram, I really think that is just years of me hearing Conan O'Brien doing his own old-timey Hollywood voice. So shout
Oh,
out to
that's fair.
Conan for being Conan, but that's the inspiration. But
I
genius
can hear it.
Jen doing the editing, so it works there. Tell us about what's on the wire.
What's up? Well, so we've got it's kind of a slow news week unless you're into award season, I think. So there's a little bit of a award season update in my podcast circuit of critics that I follow. People have finally, and by people I mean critics who have early access to movies, have seen The Color Purple, and so this sort of big question mark in the Oscar race is now starting to get kind of a visual, like, become more visible and generally very positive. So people seem to say that crowds that they're in during these screenings, these early screenings, seem to be really excited for the movie and to be sort of like cheering and clapping and receiving it really well. And then Daniel Brooks now is like pretty firmly in the, I want to say, best supporting actress race. So I don't, have you heard anything about The Color Purple?
Well, I was just going to use the opportunity to say it's such a frustrating time of year to be Oscar watcher person who's just a normal human without critic screenings, because it's like, I was listening to Vanity Fair and they're like so tired of talking about American Fiction and some of these other, and it's like, or Poor Things, which so many
Yeah.
critics saw over the summer. They're like, yeah, it's just old passe. It's like some of us haven't gotten to see it yet, and it's so frustrating. So it's really weird that if you just listen to the critics and get the meta narrative that way, it's like, oh, I feel like I missed all these movies when they really haven't come out yet. And I think you and I, in our position, we go to a lot of awards movies as quickly as we can. There's just no access, and so I have a long list of things, May, December, Boy and the Heron, American Fiction, Color Purple. And so it's funny when like there's a big flurry like what you're talking about, where it's like, oh, we finally got to see this. I'm like, yeah, I'm still waiting for all of those other ones you stopped talking about. So I haven't seen these reactions, but that's encouraging. I really felt like this was running in the West Side Story. Nobody's seen it. Oh, it's pretty good. Oh, well, too late. No attention. So it's encouraging that there might be something better here.
Yeah, it sounds like it has a lot of potential to be a pretty big Christmas release and like be the big movie. And part of that is because it's sort of in the absence of other bigger releases, probably. But like, that's going to be the holiday movie potentially that everyone wants to go see. So yeah, we'll see. I was like, oh, I'm eating my words, because like you, I had sort of dismissed it because I was like, well, no one's seen this, so nobody knows. And based on West Side Story's performance, like let's just not count it in the running. And now I have to go back and adjust all of my predictions. And I think I didn't track this before I hopped on, but the Gotham Awards were happening. They might be done now. So that potentially is good. That's sort of our first precursor, because the Golden Globes is actually the first actual precursor, but this Gotham Awards is like the first critics group kind of precursor. So and I think their big controversy was that they recently changed their rules so that they don't have a budget cap on films that can get nominated, because they were sort of like an indie film only awards ceremony, and now like Ryan Gosling got nominated for Barbie and people are like, what? That doesn't make sense for the Gotham Awards. But yes, and I was listening to Next Best Picture, and they were really talking about like this is the make or break point for Past Lives, that like if Past Lives can sort of get a bunch of these awards, then it's back in the conversation in a way that we were sort of worried that it's not. So yeah, so award season in full swing.
Yeah, well, and I just want to pile on and be like, it's so silly that the Gotham Awards made that rule change, and I'm sure I've heard a lot of the same critics making fun of it, because it is important to have roots for these smaller films without the giant machine pushing them to kind of get into this space. And I think it's right to say Past Lives is the one that could most benefit from that kind of I don't want to say resuscitation because its chances aren't dead right now, but I think what was the advantage of being out early has turned into a disadvantage because it just feels like a lifetime ago. And there's so
Mhm.
much excitement now that movie stars are back out. It's kind of lost some of those advantages. But, hearing PT on the Thanksgiving episode kind of remind us how great it was really nice. And it's like, yeah, I did really love that. And people who are listening should go back and hear you and Antonio unpack it. I mean, our top episode of all time because of the Antonio Hive, but also because it's a really great movie. And it's the kind of movie, as you said in the Thanksgiving episode, that this is the kind of one you want to talk about after, right? You got to watch it and then have a cup of tea at home after streaming it, or you go out and have a drink and talk through it. I always love, there was one time, it was Ex Machina. My friend and I saw the movie. We got in the elevator back to the parking garage. We got to our floor, and then it was like, no, I think we should go back to the bar and have a beer and talk about this movie and figure out our thoughts. And that's what Past Lives is. It's a get back down and go have a drink and enjoy it. So hopefully Past Lives can recapture some of that magic. I just want to fill in some strike recovery news because when the strike happened, I discussed on air how I had the night before the strike seen Beetlejuice 2 set up for filming, and Beetlejuice 2 came back and filmed in our hometown again, ours being my family. You don't live here. And so I got to walk by the set, which is very cool for us non-Hollywood people like you and PT, who are, I'm sure, just tripping over Brad Pitt on your way to get your mail. It was very cool to see Tim Burton back in town and Jenny Ortega, who, to transition to your next story, suddenly has a lot more free time because the
Uh,
Scream franchise has imploded. I think you're right to say this is not a podcast where we're going to parse through the politics of the Israel-Palestine fight. There are much more apt podcasts for doing that. But it is notable to say that when somebody kind of makes a political stand outside of a film and gets kind of summarily fired, without any questions asked, I think that's a little chilling. And again, I certainly think there are times when that is deserved, but it's a little shocking when it's somebody getting essentially canceled for a political belief in a complex, nuanced situation. Now, the fact that Jenny Ortega also said "see you later," I think is pretty baller, and I think the franchise is definitely screwed.
Yeah, and I think news stories that I saw framed it as Jenna Ortega was like already not going to be on it because of scheduling conflict. But if that kind of feels, and again, I have no fact to base this on, but that to me it sort of felt a little bit like a cover story. You know what I mean? Like of like that's the nominal excuse, but like she actually just doesn't want to be a part of this whole mess, which I don't blame her for. So yeah, that's I don't know, it's tricky. And I think Susan Sarandon also had a problem similar to this. And the problem is like I didn't actually click on these articles to like read what the nature of the comments they made were. So it's hard to I don't feel comfortable weighing in on whether or not these things are justified or not. But it is just the general concept, you're absolutely right, is like really unsettling. And is this just going to keep happening, or is this going to turn it? So yeah, and like this has happened to Hollywood before, where it's like the last place we want political discourse to be taking place is in Hollywood, probably, and yet like because of the the visibility of it, that's sort of usually where these things end up. And so yeah, it'll be interesting to see if this is just like the beginning of a series of these kinds of falling outs between actors and studios and stuff like that. But we'll see.
Well, and
And
real world events are more important, but our job is to talk about movies. And so, yeah, Scream had just gotten some momentum again. It seemed like it was reinvigorated. And so immediately it was like, we're calling anybody famous who was once in a Scream movie to see if they could please come back now. Cause, it's not going to make a lot of sense to shift away from these two sisters. And I guess I won't spoil some of the Scream movies, but
yeah, I was like, I didn't even know they were sisters.
These are true legacy characters within Scream, and that is kind of revealed in the course of the first of their movies. And so it's not like you can just be like, oh, and here's a different kid of a different Scream cast member we've never mentioned before. It's like they got away with it once. And so now
Mm.
I think the best thing to do is just put Scream away for a while again. But studio's got a studio, and IP is king. So I'm sure we'll get something dreadful that will make a ton of money the first weekend and nothing the second weekend.
Oh, yeah, it's tough. Sorry, Scream fans. I was not among them because I'm not a big horror person, but yeah, sorry, sorry to everyone for whom this is important franchise. To kind of double back to our Gotham Award news, I looked up. The Hollywood Reporter is updating it live. Anatomy of a Fall won Best International Feature.
Mm.
At least I think I'm reading that right. Although the nominees next to it don't make sense in that context. So I'm like, what is happening? Because it says All of Us Strangers, Anatomy of a Fall, Poor Things, Totem, and Zone of Interest. I guess that is All of Us Strangers an international feature? I guess I didn't realize that.
I think it is. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well,
they probably have a looser. It's not a foreign language. It probably is like the
oh,
director
like it can be the film can
a
be in
different
English and
country.
it's not.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. So that's exciting, and I
Hey,
think a lot of people are counting that out of the race.
yeah. Well, Zone of Interest is another one critics are done talking about. It's like, show us the movie. I want to
Yes,
see the
we
movie.
we just want to see the
Yeah.
movie. I saw a
But
trailer
I do
for it
think okay.
in the theater, like before Priscilla. Maybe that's how we get back to Priscilla.
Nice.
Yeah, the the Priscilla trailers that I saw were very weird because it started with Argyle, which I feel like is just playing at every movie. As
Every
maybe what
single
okay.
movie. Yep.
Okay, because I was like, oh, that's weird. And then it was like a slew of award season contenders because it was like Iron Claw and Zone of Interest and a couple others that we often mention but probably haven't seen. And so that was the first time I'd actually seen the Zone of Interest trailer because I hadn't watched it online, and it looks intense. So
I don't get such delicious treats. I have seen the Argyle trailer more times than you could possibly imagine. And all I was going to say is it's weird to see the Argyle trailer, which features an Elvis song, before an Elvis movie, which features no Elvis songs. So I was like, well, at least my fine trip to the theater had that one little bit of Elvis in it. And it's just bizarre. But yeah, hopefully there's a lot more good art house movies coming because I do not want to see Argyle.
yeah, I'm just like, who is going to watch this movie? It just doesn't. And maybe if you like any of those actors, that's the only thing I can think of. Because I was like, this cast is amazing. If you had just named all these actors, I'd be like, sure, I'll go see that movie, not knowing what it's about. But but now we know too much. All right, so I think we're ready to move into talking about Priscilla. So we'll start with our short takes. So Greg, what was your general reaction to Priscilla? Obviously, you recommended it for our Thanksgiving episode, so I'm assuming your short take is fairly positive. But yeah, tell us your general impressions.
Yeah, so I'm gonna bundle in my general Sofia Coppola feelings, which is like she's one of those directors where I'm like, yeah, I kind of like her, and then I go through and I'm like, oh, I've actually seen like most of her movies, and I tend to go see them all in the theater. So I think I'd underappreciated kind of how much I care about Sofia Coppola as I thought about this. It made my Thanksgiving list. People who've listened to this episode can tell I took the assignment as written, which was how do you please the crowd of your family? And I thought a lot about my family. And this seemed like something that would please a large swath of them. It's kind of an interesting story. My family likes history a lot. See literally all my picks except I think Super Mario Brothers, but let's call that history. And so I thought this was pretty good, and it was a pretty good Sofia Coppola movie. But it is not a Baz Luhrmann movie, and it is not, an Elvis movie. It is a Priscilla story, and I think people, I think what made me like it is it's got a couple great performances. It tells a side of this story that was something new to me instead of just kind of your familiar music biopic, and it just, struck me. I would not say I like teared up or was upset at all at any time, but like, the story of a woman cast in this way and kind of controlled in this way was really compelling, and the kind of thing we should be interrogating about all sorts of fame, and not even just problematic famous figures. But that's what got it on my list. I definitely thought, like, if I had my afternoon, the Friday afternoon on Thanksgiving weekend, where maybe some family members went out shopping and everybody's looking to just do something lazy, I'd be like, yeah, let's go to this one because most people will enjoy it. Adults, not kids. Kids will be bored out of their skulls.
All right. Yeah. So my short take is basically that I was locked into this movie and what it was doing for about the first half, just about. Definitely the first act, maybe spilling over into the second act. And I feel like it captures this mood so well, and especially the isolation that it seems like Priscilla experienced as a 14-year-old girl sort of living in Graceland and, just waiting at the window for Elvis to come back from touring or going on a film shoot or something like that. And so I feel like it captured the sort of isolation in of her sort of being in this huge house and being so young, and how bizarre that whole situation was, which I don't know if I want to explain what the whole situation was, because that that wouldn't be a spoiler necessarily because it's based on their biographies, but if you don't know anything about the story, like, and you want to see the movie, that is part of kind of the shock of it, where you're just like, really, like, this is how they met and how they got together, and like, this is so weird. And so I feel like it captures that really well. And just like, I was listening to the Filmcast review, and I think it's Jeff Kanata called the movie tactile. And I feel like from a production standpoint, like material things are almost like their own characters in this movie in some ways, like in terms of how the camera treats them, in a way that I think really contributes to the story, and is not just for show. It's like like all of her because so much of her character is sort of based on how she looked and how Elvis wanted her to look, and like all that sort of stuff. So I feel like the attention to detail about all that stuff was really amazing, and the costumes and the set, and just like, and even just the way that as I said, the camera sort of like frames all of these like fabrics and objects, and there's cars and like cars and perfume bottles and all the other bottles, and like in a way that, like, I think really drew me in. I'd say that sort of what kind of shifted my opinion of it and my engagement with it a little bit at that kind of halfway point in the second act was, it sort of seemed to be like, yes, we're really investing in capturing this feeling and this experience and her subjectivity. And then it felt like it didn't know where to go from there. And in terms of telling Priscilla Presley's story, I think it did a really, really good job about her the early days of her relationship with Elvis. But then after, like, the build up towards kind of the falling out of their relationship, which I feel like that's not a spoiler. They, like, most people know that they got divorced, or like their marriage didn't go well. And I feel like the ramping up to that felt a little incomplete to me, or just like it didn't really know. It sort of like it rushed through sort of the second half of her story in a way that I was just kind of like a little disoriented by. And then, that might be more about me as a viewer than about what the film, because I think the film might be not care about that. You know what I mean? Like, the film might not be interested in telling sort of a whole arc of a story in a sort of like structural way, and it might be more interested in sort of this mood that I'm talking about. But that was sort of kind of like where it lost me a little bit, was towards the end.
That's really interesting, and it is funny to like so carefully avoid spoilers when it is just history. And a lot of people know, but I think you played it right, which is because, like, again, like, you're going here probably to learn some things about this relationship and how it's put together. And I'll probably engage with those comments a little more once we are in spoilers, but I will say it is funny because there is a kind of grouping of films out at the moment that seem to have been heavily edited. And I would say the moment you're talking about, there is like a segment in the back half of this film which feels like it could have been an hour and got trimmed way down to some kind of use of montage and some other aspects that cover the ground, but very quickly. And that fits with a little bit of what we saw in the first half of the Marvels, and maybe something else that's, historical and, about a famous general that's out in theaters right now. And so I think it's kind of a funny thing, but it, to this film's credit, for the recommendation algorithm, who should see this and so on. Wait, I got to pause for the sound effect, don't I?
There we go. Now it's
So
official.
for the recommendation algorithm, one thing that's a huge selling point for this movie, and again why it got on my Thanksgiving list, it's in and out in an hour 40, I want to say. It is pretty short, and it's really nice to go into one of these big biopics and not have to do hours and hours of work. I mean, I think on this show, we are all fans of the long movie, and we all are signed up to watch the 4-hour cut of Napoleon eventually on Apple TV. But it's like in the middle of all those, I saw Priscilla, and I think the next night went and saw the new Hunger Games, which clocks in at 2:37, I think.
Oof.
And so I was like, you know what's nice? Not having to plan my whole day around a movie or stay up into the bleak hours of the morning to see a movie. So recommendation algorithm, if you have somebody, or if you are somebody who's like, I'm tired of these long movies, make short movies. Absolutely. That Ryan Johnson was promoting a hat that was make movies shorter. And
I
I'm
love it.
there because I do think there's space for the 3-hour epic, but sometimes it's great to just say, like, I got something to say. I want to show you what life was like, and then I'm just going to get out. And biopics run the risk of always choosing. They have to pick where to start and where to end, because generally speaking, they're not birth to death. Some are, but I think this movie chose that all kind of well and had a good length of stay. It didn't overstay its welcome, at least for me, though I see what you're saying about some of the flaws.
So for recommendation algorithm, I'd say that probably my number one criteria for who should go see this film is not even necessarily if you're a huge fan of Elvis, though I do want to talk about that factor, but if you're just a fan of the period of the 60s and 70s, because I feel like I was just blown away by the hair, the makeup, the costumes, everything looks like it's of that period, or just is like so transporting. And there's even like sections where the camera work, and I think I was listening to something, I can't remember which podcast now, they were saying that it looks like it was shot on film, but this was all shot digitally. And how impressive, I think it was Next Best Picture, how impressive that was. And there are lots of parts of this film that look like it sort of like tries to recreate, not to the extent the Holdovers does, but tries to recreate a little bit of like what footage would have looked like. Because I think there's a sequence in particular I'm thinking of where there's like a home camera involved, and I feel like it just really captures the period super well. And I was going back and forth. This one question I put in here was, do you have to be a Sofia Coppola fan to like this movie? I think for sure, if you already are a Sofia Coppola fan, you probably will like this movie, because it has a lot of the similar touchstones, I think, and like it's definitely fits into her body of work. Though not unlike you, I think I haven't seen a ton beyond Lost in Translation and maybe Virgin Suicides. I don't know if I've seen a bunch of other Sofia Coppola movies.
So I think you're right, and I really appreciated Sean Fennessy on Big Picture was pointing out we celebrate male directors a lot. And look, who's speaking out loud right now? When Wes Anderson does the same old Wes Anderson thing, I like throw a parade and do a dance in the streets. And yet I don't think female directors often get extended that same credit. And, I think in exactly that same way, this is Sofia Coppola doing Sofia Coppola, and it's good, right? It's a new version of that. And I think you're right to say I don't think I've seen Virgin Suicides. Maybe we can cover her career between us, but not either of us at all. But I would go Lost in Translation to Marie Antoinette to this. And I think there's a real strong DNA there that is playing with some of these same themes. This is sometimes called a gilded cage, right? Which is,
Mm.
a woman seemingly in a life of luxury that is trapped in that life in certain ways, and that's really cool. And just because you shouted it out twice, the production design is incredible. So if you're just a person who likes fashion and you kind of put the old timiness on it, or the period vintage on it, but it is just fun, and it looks like a much more expensive movie than this is. They seem, as far as I can tell, they built Graceland up outside of Toronto because they weren't allowed to film there, and just managed to kind of really create. I like your quote from Kanata of tactile, because it from the opening shot, which is Priscilla's bare feet in the deep plush of the carpet. You're just like, you feel this movie, and I think that's all a credit to it. And so even if you're like, the story, these figures, I don't care so much, it is worth kind of just in some of the kind of craftsmanship, it's worth looking at and enjoying. In fashion and makeup and hair, which, is not my bag, but as the editor of a college fashion magazine, I have to note that it is, really fun to kind of languish in those areas.
So you get your students to listen to our podcast.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, lean into it. All right. So I do want to talk about, because on the Thanksgiving episode, I had said I will not take my mom to go see this movie. Guess what I did this weekend? I took my mom to go see this movie. Well, it was more because, so my, the other comp I'll say is, if you really like the Diana arc in The Crown, that this actually has a lot in comp. To me, I saw a lot of parallels, especially not the season that just dropped, but the previous season, where they sort of show Diana getting married to Charles, and sort of that same sense of isolation and kind of boredom, and like she doesn't know what to do with herself, and she doesn't know she doesn't fit in with anybody who's there, and kind of like showing that life. The gilded cage, I guess, I really like that description of it. I feel like if you like that, then you'll probably like this, or at least be interested in this. But yeah, so I want to go back to this question of like, is this movie for Elvis fans? Because I initially was like, I shouldn't go take my mom to go see this, because it is showing Elvis in like an unflattering light. It shows, I think it treats him like a complex person who has issues, and so it doesn't totally vilify him. Like, he's not like a mustache twirling villain in this, but it's not particularly flattering in most cases. And so, like, do you feel like people who are very attached to Elvis and his music, and Elvis as the pop culture icon, like, should they avoid this movie?
It's a really interesting question, because if I loved Elvis, and I don't, but if I did, I would want to see Jacob Elordi's performance of him, because it is worth seeing, and it's so different than Austin Butler, and really good too. Like, I mean, I'm not hating on Austin Butler. So I think that would be really interesting. But you are correct. And just to speak what we've maybe implied, there's a reason why the estate is not engaging with this film, why they denied the rights to the music, and even spoke out against the film. And some of the Presleys have spoken out against the film, or did. I don't know. We got to unpack that more later. But
we'll talk about that later. Put a pin in it.
Put a pin in it. But I do think that I think this is a difference between how maybe our parents' generation and our generation deal with fame. That I think our generation is much more accepting of, I love that person, but they are probably deeply flawed, and I can still love their music and see the flaws and understand that people are complex. Whereas at least I'm not going to speak to your mom. I think I've met her twice. She seemed lovely. But my parents, I know, when I deal with, it's like they had their people, and those people were on a pedestal. And if they fell off the pedestal, then never would be spoken about again. But otherwise, it was like, nope, don't want to hear it. Don't want to know about that. Don't care about what Kevin Spacey said. I really like K-Pax or whatever, right? So I think that's kind of a difference and something that, would I take my Elvis loving parents to this? My parents don't care about Elvis, but would I? Probably not. But anybody our age and younger, I think we've had so many famous people disappoint us. We kind of deal with the complexity a little differently. How did it go? I mean, I'm more curious than anything.
Yeah. So the TLDR is she didn't like the movie. She actually like made a thumbs down gesture when we were leaving. But it didn't seem to really be for the reasons that I thought, because so when I asked if she wanted to go with me to see this movie, I was already going with my neighbor. Shout out to Amanda, who was like, she's the only one who wants to go see, like, she went to see Past Lives with me. She wanted to go I asked her if she wanted to go see Priscilla. She's like, yeah, of course. So like, shout out to her for being my my female directed movie indie movie buddy. And like so I felt like I should ask her just in case, but I gave her the full warning. I was like, look, this movie is focusing on their relationship, and it's told from Priscilla's perspective. It's supposed to be critical of Elvis and sort of like showing that maybe he was kind of a jerk, and like so I just want you to know that that's what the movie's going to be. And so like, I don't want you to go see this movie and then be mad. And she was like, no, I'll go see it. Like, that sounds interesting. And so when we were leaving, she was like, that movie was not very good. But it was because she mostly was complaining about how slow the movie was. So she wasn't into the Sofia Coppola vibe. She wasn't into the sort of soft, subtle, kind of lilting, sort of like contemplative, the sort of, it was too quiet and too slow for her. And I think she was like, I didn't really see like the point of the point of most of the things that we like, where she couldn't make sense of it because it was like too aimless kind of.
Yeah.
And like, as I mentioned earlier, like, in certain parts towards the end, I ended up in that place a couple times, not to that extreme, but she was just kind of like, that was not a very good movie. And but she wasn't like upset that they did Elvis wrong or something like that. She
interesting.
So I think that kind of changed my mind about my statement that I made in the Thanksgiving episode, because I'm like, oh, like, well, because she also is like a huge history. She loves history, and she loves kind of like the juiciness of history. And so I feel like from that perspective, even if it was kind of critical of a musical artist that she really likes, like, I think she was interested. She was piqued. Her interest was piqued because she was like, oh, I want to know like what really happened, or like what their lives were like. Right. So I kind of have changed my mind. Like, if you are that kind of person, I think you've nailed it, where it's like, if you are able to think of historical figures and ones that you like as complex humans, right, that have some problems, then I think you'll be fine. It's not going to really be super upsetting. And then you can always just go watch Baz Luhrmann's Elvis if like
it's still there. It's still streaming.
You need to be uplifted again. And to be like, wow, Elvis, what a performer, right? But yeah. All right. So I think we're ready to move into the rhetorical situation. Normally we do this after spoiler mode, but we felt like, partly because it's harder to spoil this movie. And I think a lot of the stuff that we would talk about the rhetorical situation, we'd end up talking about anyway later. So I think we're going to do the rhetorical situation, a segment in which we look at a film through the lens of our academic experience. So in the teaching of writing, the rhetorical situation refers to any contextual factors that influence composing and interpretation. There are so many contextual factors. I mean, where do you want to start, Greg? Do you want to start with like, there's a whole other Elvis movie that just came out last year, and that's kind of like bearing down on this a little bit, or just like all the Elvis factor in general? Where do you want to start?
Yeah, let's tackle the Elvis context first, because I do think that's a really interesting question. So let me lay out how I view this narrative, and then you offer your corrections, or if you have no corrections, your interpretation of like why this happened. So, well, the narrative I saw is, prior to the previous Elvis film, there was a huge amount of excitement. It's like Baz Luhrmann, it's going to be back to kind of Moulin Rouge Baz Luhrmann. Forget about all the kind of weird stuff he's done since then. We're going to get that thrill and that excitement kind of applied to a big flashy story about Elvis. And then the narrative became, ugh, this is actually about the Colonel. And it's a really weird performance and it's kind of bad. And I would say the critic class turned on that movie opening weekend or prior to opening weekend and it never recovered. But then there was this kind of groundswell over the course of the year of, I think, it was assumed to be largely older audiences kind of like loving that movie. And its final kind of reputation seems to be like actually kind of a crowd pleaser and something that people enjoyed despite not having a lot of success at the Oscars. I mean, it had certainly some meaningful nominations and all that. And then in the context of that, I think Priscilla at first got this kind of like, oh, we're doing this again. And then the studio slash Sophia slash Priscilla Presley, the living human, living human.
Yes.
They kind of decided, well, let's really position this as the other side of the story. And I think when you get to the studio, they almost went for like a behind the curtain, true Hollywood story angle, where it's like, let's tell you the real story, the truth. And I think all that is kind of interesting now that critics have seen this and kind of reacted in a way close to what you said, which is like, well, if this is the real story is like, oh, a bunch of gross, creepy stuff happened and now we don't really care. So that's how I see the kind of year in Elvis. Correct whatever you want, but then offer like, why did this happen in 2022/2023?
That to me is a great question. I don't necessarily have a great answer to that, but it does seem really weird. And it might just be that like we're kind of slowly working our way through iconic musical artists, and that like, you know, the next up is about the Michael Jackson biopic. Probably that's not actually a thing that's happening. Like there are no reports that that's in development. I want to be clear about that. But you know what I mean? Like I feel like, because there was a period, it was a while ago, but where like the Beatles were like like the Beatles one album came out, and like there was the documentary, the anthology series, right? They re-released all their music. So it might just be that we're kind of like just working our way down the list. These like famous musical artists, I guess. But it is really interesting to think about like why Elvis and why now. And if I'd be curious to dig into and I didn't do any research on this beforehand, but like dig into to see if the development of Priscilla overlaps with the development of Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, or if like one is actually a reaction to the other. Because I feel like when you watch Priscilla, it feels like a response to Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, to be like, well, like sort of as you said, like to be like, well, like Baz Luhrmann's Elvis told one story, we're going to tell this other side of the story that fewer people probably know about and should know about, right? So yeah, it's really interesting, I guess. And I think the Priscilla Presley's biography came out like in like 1985, so it's like the book has been around for a very long time. So it's not like this is like no one knew this story at all and it's just coming out now or something like that. But yeah, it does seem really interesting. I guess like, what is it about Elvis? It must be something to do with Elvis's level of fame that somehow speaks to 2023. You know what I mean? Like the age, maybe it's like a reaction to the democratization of fame a little bit, because a lot of the podcasts we like to listen to often lament the like death of the movie star, right? And how like, oh, like, you know, social media influencers often have more sway than movie stars now, or they can have as much, I guess, as movies, whereas before it was like you had to be like an Elvis or a George Clooney or something. Not that I don't want to like the second I said that, I'm like, I probably shouldn't be putting them on the same level exactly. It's like history hasn't borne that out yet. But you know what I mean? Like people who are so famous because of they're either they're an artist or an actor or something like that. That we live in an age where that's less likely to be true. And so maybe there's some kind of weird, like now a story like Elvis's is sort of a novelty, right?
That's really an interesting thought. This is the rare extinct species that you can still view at this one zoo or what have you. To kind of think that, because PT's not here, I have to do the like insider movie knowledge. Of course, the next biopic was going to be Madonna, but Madonna canceled it at the last
Oh,
minute, which was something that happened late this summer. I think like the actress had been training for months to sing Madonna and dance like Madonna, and Madonna just at the last second was like, "Nope, we're not doing this," and canceled it all. So yeah, that would have been, I think, probably next year's Oscar buzz. And I do want to use that word in particular because I think the piece we're missing there is that Bohemian Rhapsody was a huge Oscar success and probably more importantly a huge box office success, which still I do not understand. And, we can sometime do an episode. I know PT's dying for an episode of like Oscar's biggest mistakes. But the fact that Bradley Cooper got turned over for Rami Malek, who didn't even sing as Freddie Mercury, is still just mind boggling to me. And I don't understand how that happened. So I think you're right that kind of commercial idea. And this is also the same moment where a lot of Broadway shows are popping up that are doing the like catalog musical, I think it's called, where you just buy a band and you tell an original story or the story of the band or singer or what have you by just using their music.
mm,
It is kind of a version of the IP grab where it's like people will show up for Elvis and for the Beatles or what have you, even if it's not the same thing. So I'm going to selfishly then transition over to my question in the rhetorical situation, which is we have seen, I mean, Bohemian Rhapsody is not the first, but it is kind of the big one in this modern wave of just a huge number of music biopics. And so when I teach rhetorical situation in class, I spend a lot of time talking about genre because genres are things students are familiar with from their Netflix queue, from the library bookshelves. Haha, we'll pretend they go to the library. But they are familiar with this kind of idea of genre as a category of art or text or what have you. And I always can build on that understanding for students by talking about genre in academic context. And it's like, yes, you were told the 5-paragraph argumentative essay was the only thing you'd ever need to write again, but what if we think about that as a genre, and a genre that is meant to have certain so I teach genre as a constellation of conventions, which comes from Aristotle, I think. And it's like there are certain things that make a genre, and we need some of those things, some essential characteristics to recognize it. And then genres are interesting because they add to that. And I like the constellation metaphor because a constellation is a group of like 6 stars, and then we add the meaning that turns that into Leo the lion or what have you. So we can look at this genre as a kind of intersection of the conventions that have to be in a biopic and also what we all bring to them. And what is it we are looking for in a biopic? Because it seems like we're not going to stop getting these. And it can be a little different when it's music versus history. Again, I have seen Napoleon, Jen has not, so I won't compare and contrast. But these questions are on my mind. Like, we're going to keep seeing these movies. What are we looking for? What are the audience expectations on something like this?
I mean, I think there are multiple answers to that question. I think to go back to your example of Bohemian Rhapsody, I think the only explanation for why that movie did so well is because it had a ton of Queen songs in it at full blast in a movie theater, and people could rock on even if the story if the editing was not very good and the story didn't quite make sense. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and Rami Malek wasn't singing; he was just wearing some teeth, right? If you really like Queen, which I did, and I think when my first watch of that movie, I wasn't so bothered by a lot of its flaws. I was just like, yeah, I can bop my head to Killer
Mm.
Queen or whatever it is, right? And uh, or I guess the titular Bohemian Rhapsody. I'm trying to think of like what the best song was in that one, but you know what I mean. And I feel like there's a certain thrill to that, and so like I think that I would say was also true of Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, where it's
Mm.
like, oh, what song's going to come up next? But then for me, it's also the origin story part of it because I think a lot of people enjoy and consume an artist's work, but they don't necessarily know the biographical details behind it, right? So for Elvis, it was his roots, which like, you know, your mileage may vary on how well this was represented, but the Baz Luhrmann's movie starts with his roots in the gospel music and the blues, right? And how, you know, like lots of people argue that he culturally appropriated all that music, and then made a bunch of money because he was white, and like like so people suddenly were listening. The movie deals with that like a tiny bit, I feel like, but probably not enough.
Yeah.
Or at least that was a big criticism of it, I remember at the time. But the key thing is like, if people like Heartbreak Hotel or Suspicious Minds, all of these like huge hits that he had, Viva Las Vegas, right? There's lots of phases. He's like Taylor Swift. He's got eras. But what people might not know is that when he was a kid, he listened to a lot of gospel music because based on where he grew up. And the movie can share that sort of backstory with us in a way that a lot of people can find enjoyable. It actually, and this might be crude to compare it, but it actually is a little bit like a superhero movie, like the
Mm.
superhero origin story movies where it's like, oh, this is how Spider-Man became Spider-Man, right? There's a certain pleasure in knowing where something came from. And so I feel like, to me, that's a big appeal of the biopic. I think when biopics aren't working, it's because they're trying to go cradle to grave. I would say
Mm.
actually that's sort of what the big problem with Baz Luhrmann's Elvis was, that it was too comprehensive. Like it tried to cover too many, it had too many ideas and tried to cover too many things.
Yeah.
And I would say, like, obviously Priscilla is way more focused, and I think that's why as a biopic it works a lot better. But I would say that actually, to go back to my short take criticism, like the back half of it that I feel like is a little rushed, I think is because they felt like they had to get to a certain part of her life to make it feel complete. Whereas if they really had just if they had found a way to end the movie earlier in her timeline, when she was still young, you know what I mean? Like before
Mm.
things started to take a turn or whatever, right? Then maybe it would have felt like a more complete story to me. I don't know. What do you think, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, you said so much there that I think is really smart and dead on. And I'm going to summarize some of it by saying, like, I do think that there's a huge piece of this that is essentially nostalgia. And because it's Elvis and I think of the generation that loved Elvis, or the Beatles, I think those are slightly different generations, but to me, it's just people older than me. Um,
There's a Beatles
it,
joke in Priscilla,
oh, that's
if
right.
you
That's
remember.
right. So yeah, yeah. So I think, there is a nostalgia to, like, I want to have the pleasures of hearing that music again, like you're saying, of bobbing your head. And for us, that's probably more like listening to it with our parents in the car or something like that. And feeling that. And I do think that's a huge driver in a lot of these films. And then the opposite of that is the tell me what I don't know about this. And this is, again, just summarizing what you said. And so it's really interesting that you have those two competing dynamics. It's like, confirm to me that what I loved is still good,
Mm.
and also tell me what I don't know about it. And those can be really opposed. And I would say this film, in the context of that struggle, I think didn't please a lot of people because it wasn't enough of the Elvis story to feel nostalgia. And maybe what you're saying, keeping it broad still, because you just masterfully avoided spoilers, so I can't blow it now, is that, there's not a lot that goes beyond the public record of their marriage in a lot of ways. There's a little. I'm not going to totally dismiss that. But it isn't, like you said, the origin story. And I think your comparison is apt because a figure like Elvis seems superhuman, seems like he does great feats that nobody could possibly attain. And so we do want to kind of unlock, like, how was it that person? And, there are been so many. I was just thinking about Rocket Man, which I think I saw opening weekend and then haven't thought about ever again. And Rocket Man did a lot of that, where it felt like this is a person like who descended from heaven. And it's just like incredible, the talent that Elton John has. And then it's like, okay, move on. Like, so we did want to unlock where that comes from, and I think you're right. The only other piece I want to put in play, because I hear so many critics make this point, across all the different critics I read and listen to, and it's the Dewey Cox point, which is a few years ago, Walk Hard by Dewey Cox came out. And it is, I did not see it when it came out. I saw it finally. I was like, so many people have mentioned this. I got to see it. But it is like the perfect spoof of these films. And it just decimates the genre. Like it just, every single bit of that film is just spot on parody of all of those things that are really cloying and terrible in these movies. And that's not to dismiss the genre. There are a lot of these good genres. So into that mix of like, are we looking for nostalgia? Are we looking for the behind the scenes? Then you add in, now these films have to do something that breaks out of that mold, or else they're just going to get made fun of and do something different. And I think I saw the David Bowie documentary last year. In calling it a documentary doesn't really capture it. It was a Moon Age Daydream. I'll look up the
That
title in
sounds
a
right.
moment. It was phenomenal. I am not somebody who does recreational substances, but I'm like, man, I wish I was on some recreational substances for this, because I think it would have elevated the experience. But it to me was like, we can't do the standard biopic anymore, and it had to break that out, and it was trying to do something really different while still using archival documentary footage and performances and kind of walking you through the career of Bowie. But it was like really much more much bigger than that. So I do think Priscilla strikes me as the kind of biopic where it's like we had to break totally out of the mode, and it is a movie about Priscilla, not Elvis. I just don't want to lose sight of, but we still don't know exactly what that's going to be. And the reason I asked this question in the outline is because this is the movie I've been to in the last easily 5 years where the most people have walked out of, kind of girlfriends on a seemingly like girlfriend outing. A very funny young couple that walked out, and I assumed they were walking out, and then the husband or boyfriend came back because his keys had fallen out of his pocket and was digging around in his seat for his keys, and then left.
Awkward.
So that was shocking to me. It's only an hour and 40 minutes, but that told me people are not getting what they want. And I think your comments about your mom's reaction help illuminate that. Maybe it was just too still and slow for some of them. But my gut was they wanted an Elvis story, and this is
Yeah.
not Baz Luhrmann's Elvis, and so they're bored and just want to go.
Or maybe they wanted the Baz Luhrmann version of Priscilla. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
maybe they wanted to see more of her taking like having like attitude and like, you know, putting on the eyeliner but being sassy and empowered. Like that's not this movie, right?
Um,
It is very kind of still and quiet and introspective and melancholy,
mm,
because you just, you know, it's everything that could be glamorous is sort of cast over with a shadow. And so yeah, maybe they were hoping for kind of the glitzy fun time version of the story. I think it wasn't your letterbox review, shout out to the women in my row who thought this was going to be a romance.
Oh yeah, no,
Was
it
it
was
you?
shout out to the women who took way too long, because
Oh,
I had some like I'm stereotyping. I'm a terrible person. Let's all say it. I had some Jacob Elordi fans in my row, and so as soon as he started appearing as Elvis, it was like, ooh, like if that would be if they were on a sitcom, but
I
it was
mean,
essentially that.
we haven't talked about this yet. He is a very good Elvis. That's what I was
Yeah,
actually really
he's
surprised by.
phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
he's
he's a
really
total
good.
dreamboat. I mean, he's a good-looking guy, and people should see Saltburn too, because you're like, oh, I get it. I totally understand the kind of worship of him. And so then like I'm just like deep in the movie, like an hour in, when everybody else is like, oh wow, her life was terrible. He'd like, you know, give her flowers or something, and they'd be like, oh, like he's still a goodie. And I'm like, he just slept with Anne Margaret. He's not a good guy. And honestly, this is the last thing I'll say. It reminded me when the Trump locker room talk thing happened, and so many female voters were like, "Yep, that's just what guys are like." I was like, no, like, and if your guy is like that, no, like, get away from him. Like, and so it felt to me like, is this the very low bar men in this country have set that, like, okay, you can go sleep with Anne Margaret, but hey, bring her flowers after, buy her a gun after, and it'll all be forgiven. So
Oh,
yes, sorry, I totally forgot about them. But that is my
do you,
rant on
you know
who I
what
shared
that
my row
reminds
with.
me of? And this is a tangent, but I think it's a good one. So Disneyland a while ago had a live show version of Frozen,
Mm.
and the time I went to go see it, there were people in the audience. I it was far enough away that I don't know. I can't just say anything about their age or their gender. They sounded like girls, probably, but like I don't know. And like the part where, and I guess spoilers for Frozen. So fast forward if you somehow haven't seen Frozen and don't want to know what happens. But the part where, like, is it Hans? Like, but the prince that turns out to be bad.
Yep.
Like, there's an early song where like he and Anna are like falling in love and they're being very cutesy with each other and stuff like that. These people in the audience went, "Oh," like at the end of that song, and I'm like, yo, you've seen the movie, you know what happens. Like, why are you happy about this? Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, clearly if you're like reacting that strongly, you're a fan of Frozen. Like, and chances are, and like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna assume most people seeing that live show have seen the movie. And so it was
Yeah.
just mind-boggling to me that, like, even knowing that he's the villain of the movie, they were still like swooning over this scene, this meet cute. And so maybe that's a little bit of it. I don't know. And like, this
Yeah.
movie does really in interesting ways engage with the idea of teenage girl fantasies, I would say.
Mm.
And I won't say more because that might be spoilers, but like,
Yeah, we should unpack that in
um
spoilers. But that being said, from the moment the romance starts and you're like, she's 14, this is no go, no bueno, and yet, oh look, he opened the door for. I'm like, he opened the door for a child. Sorry, I'll stop yelling. But yes,
we tried
Ah.
really hard, everybody. We tried. We try to preserve it. But if you're still listening, like, you're probably okay with us, like, talking
Yeah.
more about the
Again,
premise of the movie.
these are the public knowledge bits. So
Yeah, it's true. It's true. Um, okay.
let's go to
Do you feel
spoilers.
like, yeah, let's go to spoilers. We are that this is a sign. We should take this as a sign.
Yeah.
So if you have not seen Priscilla and apparently Frozen, then you should not proceed. Go see the movie. The movie is definitely worth seeing. And I would say now I would
Definitely.
change my position that if you are an Elvis fan, I think it is worth seeing because it's worth knowing this piece of his history through Priscilla's perspective. And then come back and join us for the rest of the conversation. All right, so I think we should start with, since we were already bumping up against it and starting to talk about it, like, how does this film portray Elvis, and like, how bad is it? Because we've been tiptoeing around it, we've been alluding to it. Let's actually get into it. Like, how is Elvis portrayed in this movie?
Jen, boys will be boys, and we should just excuse. No, all right. So I think here's my problem. The estate is pissed off because they show Elvis doing drugs and sharing drugs, particularly pills, with Priscilla from pretty early in their relationship. I'm not sure exactly. She might have still been a minor,
It's when
and
they're
that's
in
what they're up.
Germany. They're still in
Oh yeah, that's
Germany, and
right. Yeah,
he's like, take this. They give this to us in the army to stay awake during fights. Like, and so
that's
you have to
right.
wake up to go to high school tomorrow. You can take
Yeah.
this so you can stay awake. Uh, um,
So that's what the estate is mad about, and I would say that is like 50th on my list of things. So I'm gonna just give the broad
and it's
strokes
also
and
in Baz
say,
Luhrmann's movie. It's not
yeah,
like pills
I
aren't
mean,
in Baz Luhrmann's Elvis,
if you
and no
like
one complained about
Elvis,
it then.
you know he did drugs. Like, I'm
Yeah,
sorry, you just know this. So my kind of broad strokes will be, this presents Elvis as a deeply flawed man who turns those energies into the manipulation of Priscilla. And I would not always say he's conscious of what he's doing, but what he is doing is grooming a 14-year-old girl and transforming her into a fantasy that he gets to put on a shelf and literally, in some cases, never touch, never engage with. And she becomes a toy in his collection, right? A car that he puts in the garage with his money and is just totally, treated. She's objectified in the very literal sense. She is turned into an object, not a human being. And so he comes off as just a total creep and total weirdo throughout, even if I will give the slight out that he's not conscious of the choices he's making. But you loved him in this. Go on.
So I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but I actually do really like Elvis's music. Like and that's in part because of the influence of my mom. My dad is a huge Beatles fan. My mom is a huge Elvis fan. My dad is also actually a huge Elvis fan. I think they their wedding song was the really slow, like, wise men sing only fools rush in. Fools
Only
rush in, I guess is
fools.
maybe. Yeah,
I
yeah,
can't
yeah. I
help
think that
falling in
was
love.
yeah,
I don't
thank
know
you.
the title, but I could just jump ahead in the lyrics for you.
So like it's been a big part of like I grew up on Elvis's music, and I'm a huge fan of Lilo and Stitch. We got to shout that out. Which apparently Jacob Elordi, I didn't read up on this, made a joke that like he learned how to do his Elvis accent from Lilo and Stitch. But
That's
I was like,
amazing.
respect. I respect you a lot more now. And sort of like sniping at Austin Butler potentially. The two of them need to be at the Oscars. Sorry, like this is a tangent,
Yeah.
but like we
That's
need
a
that needs,
presenting. Yeah. Yeah.
and there needs to be like an awkward like, oh, you were Elvis too joke. Like that's it needs to happen. But yeah, so anyway, so it's not like I didn't have any skin in this game. Like I do enjoy his music a lot. But like the thing I think I didn't realize before I watched this movie or heard about this movie at all was that she was 14 when they met, and basically like like a handler picked her up at this diner, right? And so I feel like this movie does such an amazing job of capturing just how bizarre and just twisted this whole situation is, and
Hmm.
like how no one should really have been okay with this. I mean, obviously it was a different time, and so this sort of thing probably was more acceptable, but like, for sure 120%, like if this is happening in 2023, like no. Like people are getting arrested,
Yeah.
right? So like like um and I think it really showed that like he didn't want Elvis didn't want a partner. He wanted a doll, right? And like and that's
Yeah.
the other thing I didn't realize is that like he's really controlling every inch of her existence. I think the moment for me, I mean, there's a lot of like creepy stuff that happens way before this, but for me it was when he's like telling her what to wear, and that she's not allowed to
Mm,
wear patterns, and that she has to wear blue. And then when she's like, but I like this one, and he just like totally doesn't care. It's just
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh no, like this is, and so I want to go back to the family controversy, because it's Lisa Marie Presley, who has now passed away, but when she was still alive was protesting this movie and sort of like really
Mm,
criticizing it. And I believe the movie hadn't been filmed yet, but it was like she had read the screenplay and was very upset, and sort of saying that like this is not my father, and like this, and like, and the quote I thought was really interesting was she said, I am worried she, meaning Priscilla, her mom, doesn't understand the intentions behind this film or the outcome it will have. um
yeah.
and so what's interesting is that this question of like how the film is representing Elvis, I think, is actually more open to debate than you and I kind of reacted to the movie, because I feel like there was this whole discourse of Priscilla being like, no, really, like he was very respectful, like because I was so young, like he wanted to make sure that like he didn't do anything that he, that
Hmm.
until we were married, and like all that sort of stuff. And so I feel like that is in the movie, but it's such a drop in the bucket in terms of like all the other stuff that's going on. And so like it kind of, to me, it's like I can sort of see people pointing to, oh, like he like respected her, and like they didn't have sex until they were married, or like until she was older or whatever. but there's so much else going on around that
Yeah.
that it almost doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Like in terms of their dynamic together. And grooming is the good word, right? Like, cause it's like, yeah, just the idea that he's like, go wait, like go to the room, the second door on the right upstairs and wait for me there. Like that just like
Mhm.
feels really creepy.
Yeah. Um, oh, there's so much there. So, I'm not gonna begrudge Lisa Marie Presley, especially after she has now passed, the right to defend her father and that representation. But you pointed to the language in that quote that really makes it feel kind of demeaning to Priscilla. Like it sounds like Priscilla is being taken advantage of. Now, I do not know the ins and outs of these people and where they are today, but I have been led to understand by coverage of this film that these are the roles they tend to play, which is Lisa Marie is the guardian, or excuse me, was the guardian of Graceland and of the trust and of all the estate, and so has to protect that and kind of vanguard the legacy of Elvis, whereas Priscilla is free of all that for reasons the film shows, because she left, their marriage ended, and so had the freedom to speak out. And it doesn't sound to me like Sophia invented anything that wasn't in the biography in the 1980s, like you said, but I do think it is a film with a modern sense of these things. And to pull in, you left a thought in Rhetorical Situation, which was very good, which is this movie does an outstanding job of showing, not telling, which is the phrase and tattooed on the brain of every writing teacher of all time. And it everything you just said, like, it is just a creepy like handler who clearly had the job of finding young women and bringing them to Elvis's house for him to look at and enjoy the company of young women. And in the movie doesn't like have him get called out and have a confrontation where the dad punches him and says, "How dare you with my daughter?" The film just puts the facts out there and lets you draw your interpretation. And it's really well done in that regard. So I think that in some ways proves Lisa Marie's thing. Like, it is way more damaging to look at this in the harsh light of the present day. And it does do damage to my personal impression of Elvis, but that doesn't mean it's wrong or shouldn't be said. And again, I want to tread very carefully, but just because a marriage is this flawed and this problematic in so many regards doesn't mean that there wasn't love there, and it doesn't mean that that child isn't a valued and wonderful human being that resulted from that. And that's kind of Killers of the Flower Moon too, right? Like, Ernest was awful, but there was real love between Ernest and
Mhm.
Molly, and there's kind of just this similar vibe here of like, you can have somebody who is deeply flawed and inflicts those flaws on somebody else, and yet that doesn't mean there's not love and affection there. I mean, Priscilla drives that Cadillac out of that yard with great glee and should have, but there's a reason why the song playing, I mean, there's a lot of reasons, but the song playing is Dolly Parton's I Will Always Love You. And it's beautiful because it's like she will always love him for who he was and the life they had and all those things. And so the fact that me, John Q, knows nothing about Elvis, can have all that complexity in mind, I think speaks to the power of the film and undercuts Lisa Marie's argument about it.
Yeah, and like there's a line in this where she says, "If I don't leave now, I'm never going to leave," which I believe is the one line that actually exactly overlaps with the Baz Luhrmann film, because there's that
Mm.
scene where it's the scene in the hotel room where she basically shows up to tell him that they're getting divorced and she's leaving him, and he's like, "I should have seen this coming." So like I that is where I was like, the multiverse is colliding. Because it like it reminded me so much of the other movie. But I think the yeah, and it I don't know, and it shows. I mentioned earlier about how this movie engages with sort of the trope of like teenage girls fantasies, right? And the the line where the creepy guy who like seems to not care to be a chaperone at all, right? Like he's like, "Oh, she'll be fully chaperoned by my wife and I," and they just like
Mm.
peace out after. Like they're not paying attention at all.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure is by design, I guess. But but he says, "Do you like Elvis?" And she goes, "Of course, like who doesn't?" Right? And so the idea, and I think the movie does such a good job of showing that like she has to lead this double life of like she's still a teenage girl who's a fan of Elvis, but also has to be this like very mature romantic partner for Elvis that gets kind of swept up. And so like, and the contrast between like her parting with the I think people call it the Memphis Mafia, like the
Yeah.
entourage of like all of Elvis's friends that he goes and hangs out
The
with.
dude
Like
bros. Yeah.
yeah, the fact that she like gets like the contrast between showing her trying to keep up with them and hanging out with them, and then cut to she's sitting at a desk in like a school uniform trying not to fall asleep, like I thought was so powerful because it really showed that like yeah, she had to somehow like they still had her going to school because her parents were like, you can't go to Memphis unless you graduate from high school, right? And so
Yeah.
she's just living this double life in a way that Elvis doesn't have to, right? Because Elvis gets to kind of freely dip in and out of their relationship, and but she has to kind of like deal with this duality of like her being a child who has to graduate from high school,
Yeah.
but then also Elvis's girlfriend somehow. And yeah, I think that was
That was
probably my
the
favorite part of the movie.
Yeah, that was the weirdest season of Alias, where no, I mean, it feels like that kind of spy thriller, almost like you're saying with that double life. Um, I agree, and I don't think I'd thought about it, but that was probably my favorite part of it too. And to fold in two things you've said now, the idea of somebody's monstrousness or virtue coming down to just sex is really interesting here, because I think you're right. We go to pains to make it clear they're not having sex and they are only kissing until she's of age, and I believe until they're married. And she, in the beautiful teen girl part of it, is like horny because she's a teen girl and is with Elvis all the time and wants to sleep with him. And so it was really refreshing to actually feel the sexual coercion going the opposite way. And in that, no way challenges how monstrous his behavior was, because that's the truth. Like, sex is just one tiny part of the kind of toxic domestic relationships that we interrogate. And I think society tends to focus in on that and like, oh, he never crossed that line, so he's okay, the end. And it sounds like Priscilla in the book and in her talk here, kind of ascribed to that, like he was a gentleman. And it's like, no, he wasn't a gentleman, because being a gentleman means listening to your partner. And if it's legal, I'm not endorsing anything other than that, but like giving into their needs as well as yours. And what is clear in the film is that the entirety of literally everything in his life, but their relationship, is on his terms. And she is in no way a human who can express her own desires, or if she wants to make out, if she wants
So,
to do things.
and the one
That
time
should be
that
considered.
he asked her opinion, the one time he asked, "What did you think about the song?" and she says, I don't know if I liked it," is when he throws a chair at the wall. You know what I mean? Like, so yes, like she's not allowed to be her own person. Which is
Mhm.
why I think it's so powerful. The one thing I did like about the ending was like the actual terms in which she left, right? Where she's like, I'm not leaving you for another man. I'm leaving you for a life of my own. And I feel like that the film does such a good job of demonstrating the need for that, right? How she never
Yeah.
had that when she was with him. Um, which is yeah, it's so fascinating. And like even where the part the many things cracked me up in this movie actually. The gun joke that we made at the very beginning where she just like, and again, this is like showing not telling, which for the people I went to the movie with was very frustrating, but I,
Mm.
as you know, as a writer, I definitely respected. And like she's just laying these outfits on the bed, and then there's a gun that is perfectly color coordinated and
Each
matching
one.
to each outfit on the bed, and it's just like and then nothing is said about it, right? And there's so many moments where
Mhm.
nothing is said about anything, right? And yet like, and that was actually the criticism of my neighbor and my friend Amanda, who saw the movie with me. She was like, I just wanted to get to know her more. I
Mm.
wanted to know who she was as a person. And I feel like since she didn't say anything the whole movie, I didn't get that opportunity. Now, a lot of critics would say that Cailee Spaeny's performance is so internalized, and that she's doing so much with her expressions and stuff like that, there's an you could argue there's enough there. But I would actually say that that's a deliberate choice on the movie's part, that it's like
Yeah.
she didn't get to be a person. So we don't get to know her because she didn't get to know herself, right? Like she didn't get to develop her own identity. She was always sort of defined by her relationship with Elvis.
I think that's exactly right. And that I wouldn't even feel like I was building a stretch of a defense by saying that. Like the point of the story is the way he manipulated her. She was not a real human. And, again, I'm going to completely agree that the last 20 minutes are a little rocky. The end is pretty
What's
flawless,
going
but
on with the
up until
karate
the last
instructor?
20.
Like,
Yeah.
questions.
That's the part we were referencing in the spoiler-free zone. It's like, that just feels like it was chopped up. Like somebody decided we need to get to the gate, and yet we have to rush to get there. And, you know, that's around the time we've got like the third or fourth time the tabloids are saying Elvis is sleeping with somebody or engaged to somebody, and she just has to ignore it. And so I think all that is hard to deal with there. But it was a like Stella gets her groove back montage where it's like middle-aged lady learns to be herself. She's gonna do karate now. She's gonna have her own garden. And
I was like, this is the
and
most 70s thing ever.
yeah. Well, and that's exactly what I was gonna say, is it turns into a hair story. It's like then her
Mhm.
natural hair color comes back, and she goes from the 50s beehive to what I would call the 70s Farrah Fawcett, like, kind of curls
The
and
long.
and
She has the
waves,
long
not
straight
curls,
hair
but
before
waves.
that. She has the long
Yeah,
straight hair
yeah.
before that, right? Yeah.
That's right.
Um,
Um, and like the film is so good because obviously Cailee Spaeny is like a beautiful actress, and it's like she looks like a child and like mousy and cute, and I mean she's always the same age. They don't have multiple actresses, which is just incredible. And then you see the transformation into the Priscilla we know. And it's like, it's so artificial, and like she's still beautiful underneath all that, but you're so mad because you're like, she was so beautiful before. And so then the end feels like, oh, okay, she found herself again, and having everything reinforce that. Um, it worked. It's just it. I don't even know that I want it to have taken more time there. It's just that it doesn't always feel like we got the full arc. It's clearly to me that Sofia Coppola had this image I need to end the movie where these gates that have been in the background and have been keeping out the world finally open, and she's free at the end of the movie. And that involved kind of yada yada yadaing like a decade or so. And it's really hard to piece together if you don't really know this story.
right. And actually, that's what I wanted to ask you too, is like, do you feel like it was helpful to have seen Baz Luhrmann's Elvis just purely from a timeline perspective?
Uh yes, although again, I mean I love my life and I have no regrets. But when I see these movies like opening weekend and then consume 5 podcasts that week and then don't think about them for a year and a half, it's not like it's very present in my mind. So I was glad for that, but I would not claim I had total ownership of that. I think on the basic level, this movie just wants you to know he's off living a glamorous rock star lifestyle, movie star lifestyle, and she just is locked in the house, and that's kind of the point. So which album and which TV special and which time, blah blah blah, doesn't matter as
Yeah.
much, but I do think if I had only seen this and had no clue what was going on, I would have been frustrated. So it has to be the most fascinating double feature of the last couple of years to play one and then the other.
Yeah, and actually, I would recommend watching both, because I feel like they are one shades in the other. You know what I mean? Like, because
Mm,
I feel like if I hadn't seen the Baz Luhrmann film and known about the Colonel, which I didn't,
yeah.
and then those phone calls that he's making don't mean as much. I feel like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know the context
Hmm.
of like, and like, and to me, the funniest moment in this movie was when she's like, she comes out and she says, like, I hate these philosophy books and like all this like stuff that you're doing. You got to stop. And he just totally dismisses her and gets mad. And then like 2 seconds later, they show him on the phone with the colonel being like, okay, Colonel, I'll put away the books.
Okay.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
like, and then they show him burning the books, and and the look on her face says everything, where she's just like, are you serious? Like, you're going to listen to him and not me. Whereas I've been telling you to do this whole time. Right.
That's that old adage of hurt people, right? It doesn't excuse his behavior, but it just shows that he is putting her in the exact kind of cage he's in. And what I do remember about the Baz Luhrmann movie is, while it is really glamorous, it's essentially all about how Elvis was never in control of his own choices and destiny. And so there is a nice resonance between the two there. But sorry,
Yeah,
finish
it's
your
interesting
point.
that like they mention he's like, my daddy knows I have him, I'll do all the accounts, right? Like, and that's a whole plot line in the other movie,
Yeah.
right? Of how he mismanaged. Like, Elvis assumed everything was being taken care of, and his dad was actually mismanaging all his money, right? So, and also listening to the colonel and like the whole complex of his finances and the money he was making, and like the movie really, Baz Luhrmann's movie really presents him as a victim, right? Like that he was basically worked to death because too many people were profiting off of him, that despite his health problems, they sort of kept pushing him to keep performing. Or at least that's what the movie implies. Right. And so like it's really interesting to pair that with this, where it's like, he's definitely not a victim in this movie. He might be a victim of his own fame. Right. Like, I think the movie is a little bit forgiving in terms of like trying to show that this lifestyle of having to go on all these tours and all these shoots could have informed the way that he treated Priscilla, right?
Yeah.
But obviously, yeah, as you said, doesn't excuse it. But yeah. So yeah, I almost thought it was like, I'm like, how much of the movie would I just have missed if I hadn't known the other history that Baz Luhrmann was trying to tell? Right. Interesting question. I'm like, it's the Elvis cinematic universe. You need to watch all of it.
Yeah, what the one thing we haven't talked about that I just want to shout out, I don't even have anything that intelligent to say about it, but one aspect of this that is incredible is the physicality of just putting Cailee Spaeny and Jacob Elordi on screen. Two, again, very attractive people, two vastly different heights. So
Yes.
Cailee Spaeny is 5'1", and Jacob Elordi is 6'5", which means that is more than Elvis and Priscilla. There was a large height gap between them. Priscilla is a petite woman, but the way that like in just they look like they can be happy and in love, and they look totally glamorous, kind of coming out of Vegas casinos and all that. But when they need to flip it to kind of power dynamic or Elvis threatening her, it's like, you're like, she had no choice. Like this is a huge man just about to crush her. And, obviously that has to do with casting. I can't imagine they were cast for their heights, but it just is used to such great effect. Sofia Coppola in the interview I listened to was like, yeah, it was helpful, but we also had to put her on apple boxes, like more than you would ever believe, because just to get them in frame together. But I can see. I always felt that way when Dwight and Angela would kiss on The Office. You're like, wow,
Oh yeah,
those two
she's so
people are
tiny.
like so far apart. That's a long journey. But I just want to shout out. It was really fun and really great. And I'm not going to spoil Saltburn whatsoever, but a very kind of different role for Elordi. But he similarly towers over Barry Keoghan, just because he's 6'5", and so in those moments, it doesn't ever have that kind of same dynamic. But I was like, oh, he's a wee guy too. Like, I don't think he's that tall, but it was funny to kind of see that physicality across these two films in this weird. That's the other cinematic universe going on, right? The Elordi CU.
Right.
So you have to get it caught up on that one.
Okay, yeah. Hopefully I can see that soon, because I want to make sure we review it at some point. The last thing I'll say before we move on to Oscars to watch, because I just thought of it and I was like, oh, that was a kind of a good point. So again, I'm going to shout out my neighbor Amanda, because she pointed out when we were walking out of the theater, wow, Elvis was really, really into the Madonna horror duality, right? And so it's like, and to go back to your earlier point about him, how different interpretations of him being a gentleman with Priscilla, and I feel like the darker reading of that is like that he had some really psychologically questionable desires surrounding her virginity, right? Like that some,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like that there's something weird going on there, right? And to the you can psychoanalyze that in a whole other episode. Probably have enough to say there.
The line when he's leaving Germany that says, "You have to stay the way you are." That's how I picture
Yeah.
you. That's also what you're talking about right now, right? It's like, you have to be the virginal schoolgirl that I can fantasize about and keep in my collection. You don't get to have desires or have contact with other people and so on. So you mentioned before his like weird Bible phase moment. I didn't know that existed in Elvis's life, and it reminds me of how much guff Marilyn Monroe gets for like when she started dating Arthur Miller, and it was like, oh, suddenly she's wearing glasses and carrying around a book, and I was like, wait, Elvis did this too, and yet I haven't heard about this. So it was illuminating to see that, and I think it all folds into that weird dynamic he had, and it feels like there are still large parts of this country that, overemphasize virginity and, abstinence as the clear path to virtue. And, the warping effect that may be having on people, I think is explored here in Elvis. So it's interesting.
All right. I think we're ready for Oscars watch. So, Greg, how much do you think this movie is actually in the Oscars conversation? It goes on too long. I still have to edit this down.
All right. I want my answer to be so much more jaunty because of the music. Like, gee, Jen, well,
Okay.
let's talk about Hollywood magic, and I'll soft shoe while responding.
I was searching for red carpet music. That was my
Yeah,
that's how we
it
ended up with
nailed
this.
it. Nailed it. I'm going to base my answers here on kind of the buzz that was largely around the Venice Film Festival and then now and the kind of reception. I think this is going to be largely left out of the Oscar conversation. It just feels like it wasn't enough of a crowd pleaser to take that lane. It didn't. I think the performance is amazing, but there's no Oscar reel moment. Emily Blunt is still winning the lead actress, or sorry, she'd be supporting actress, Oscar reel race, not the race for the Oscar, but who has the best moment for the reel, because she has the one crying and yelling scene. And it would be hard to pick out a moment for this, even though I do think it's a great performance. So my guess is we aren't going to hear anything for it. If we do hear something, I think it is probably Cailee Spaeny that has the best shot. And part of that is what I mentioned before about the way she's able to move from 14 to 40 kind of across this film. And by all accounts of the filmmaking, often in the same day, they'd like shoot some schoolgirl scenes in the morning and then switch to, full hairdo and so on in the afternoon, which is pretty incredible to think about.
Yeah, I'd say that I don't see it either. I'm actually leaning more towards it could have a shot at adapted screenplay more than anything else. And part of that is just because of Sofia Coppola's track record. Like the one Oscar she's won was for a screenplay. It was for original screenplay for Lost in Translation. So I feel like that's a possible thing. But yeah, I think it's one of those films that if it gets in at all, it's just going to get one nomination somewhere. I feel like lead actress is probably pretty stacked. So I don't know if I don't think she can make it in either. Because it's right now it's what, like, oh, I guess is Carey Mulligan going to go lead or is she supporting? I can't remember now. For Maestro.
For Maestro, I think lead, but that's one
lead,
that
okay.
could go either way. But yes.
But she's probably campaigning. It might be one of those things where she's
Maestro,
campaigning.
another movie all the critics have seen and are tired of talking about, but we haven't seen yet. Yes.
Well, yeah, obviously it's like Lily Gladstone and Emma Stone and I mean maybe Annette Bening, but maybe not. Probably at this point, probably somebody from Color Purple,
Past Lives too.
Fantasia Barrino, right? So there's just a lot of there's a lot of people who are firmly in the race, and then like whole slew of maybes. And so
Yeah.
yeah, I feel like it's very likely she gets lost in the shuffle. Um,
I think if this had had a huge opening and was really driving box office, there'd be a strong spot up there. But by all accounts, it's still Emma Stone's category. And, I mean, in your list just now, you didn't even get to Margot Robbie, which would
oh,
have
that's right.
surprised Summer Jen. But I think is a real maybe. Like she belongs in that maybe category. Same with Greta Lee, unfortunately, even though I think she's fantastic and so on. Um, I always wish these categories were based on like they could be in the Olympics you get your technical score but it's out of a different number depending on how many hard elements. Like I wish that's how they valued these parts because I do think it's a really difficult part compared to some of the ones you just listed. There are a lot of difficult parts in there. I mean, Annette Bening swimming like endlessly, just forever. But it was a very challenging role to do all these ages, to do it so well. And I think what she's probably gonna get out of this is like a few really great offers for cool new roles for her next project. Although I guess she already has a film in the can with Kristen Dunst, which is how she got
Oh,
recommended
nice.
for this. But I don't know what
Oh,
the
I think I did
equivalent is.
hear that. Yeah. There's that a big picture that they talked about that. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, I think so.
Um, so the other thing actually I just thought of is like I can see this getting a lone craft nomination,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know why I didn't think of that earlier. But like costume, hair, and makeup, I feel like it could get in there, and then nothing else. Because it's period. It is towing that line of like the Academy prefers older period pieces to have be the random nomination, but like Cruella got in for costume and
Yeah.
hair and makeup, I want to say. So and like so, it's the right era potentially. Um, so that's definitely a possibility. But again, it's one of those things that like if it starts getting a lot of precursor awards for whatever reason, or critics kind of rally behind it, then that could turn the tide a little bit. But right now, I would say I would be pretty conservative and not really count it in. I don't think it has a shot at Best Picture. But yeah.
But that's okay.
So
It's still
yeah.
good. And it's still, there is this common complaint that this is the scale of movie they don't make anymore, right? The budget point on this and the kind of quiet nature of it. And I think we're both advocates of that kind of movie should exist. And we love the Oscar races. And one of us is crazy enough to see every single thing nominated. But it's also okay if we don't, if it doesn't get that exact prestige, it can still be kind of a beloved movie. I think where I see Sofia Coppola is it's just she can still kind of get whatever project she wants off the ground. And that's exactly where I want her forever, kind of like Wes Anderson, who can continue to do it. And, if these become kind of cottage brands, then that's okay. And the people who love them can keep enjoying them. And the people who don't can go see, I don't know, Marvel movies. Who knows? Weirdos like that.
Wes Anderson's a really good comparison. I hadn't thought about that because they have very similar. The two of them have very similar relationships with the Oscars and with the Academy, because I
Mm,
think Wes Anderson, similarly with Grand Budapest Hotel, seemed to have a lot of Oscars, you know, love, and then like everything went quiet after that. Really,
yeah.
it's just been a slow drop off since then. So like you put in our outline, why did the Academy fall out of love with Sofia Coppola? Do you have thoughts about that? Like, do you have a theory?
I mean, I want to note that I think Marie Antoinette failed in studio Academy terms. I don't know that it was like an absolute abysmal business, but that was her sophomore album. And that's not exactly fair because she had other movies, but it's like she really broke with Lost in Translation and got all this attention. And then they didn't know what to do with Marie Antoinette, the contemporary music, the historical, but they're talking like present day. That all didn't work for them. And
Mm.
so I think as soon as that got kind of uh, pushed back, then just a lot of what followed. And, Amanda Dobbins pointed out on Big Picture, she's had a like trying stuff period the last few years. Her last movie was in the middle of the pandemic. I remember it dropped on Apple TV and it was like, it was Bill Murray and Rashida Jones. And it was kind of
This is On the
Sophia
Rocks.
working. Yes.
Okay. I
Sophia
haven't seen
working
that.
through her feelings about her dad, it kind of seems. And it was, I remember being excited. I think my wife and I sat down and watched it the night it came out, and it was fine, but it was kind of like a cool sitcom episode or a dramedy more than it was like something really. So I think that's all to say. I think it's a little bit of a bad second album, and then just not doing. I mean, The Beguiled was not really awards fair either, so I think we're kind of staying out of it. But as I would say about Wes Anderson, that's fine. Do your thing, make the art you love, make it for the people who love it, and don't worry so much if the normies don't get it or whoever.
I was gonna say well said, but then you used the word, you invoked the term normies, and now I can't endorse that because I was getting made fun of for that forever. All right, so I think that's a wrap. Greg, where can folks find you on the internet for all the fine work you
People
do?
can well, of course, as always, thanks for being on. It's such a joy to be on the podcast whenever we get asked to, and to also have an excuse. Like the other night I was going to go to bed and I was like, I got to go see Napoleon because I'm going to get the call, and the call's going to come in. So it's always good to have an
And then
excuse to see
PT messed
movies.
that up for us
Yeah,
because
it's coming.
he
That
hasn't.
will probably be our episode after this. Long take fans who, again, when you get this late in the episode, we're only talking to PT, so it's fine. So people can find me online at eyeoncanon.com, EYEONCANON. That's my Substack with a recent entry about Star Wars The High Republic, which is about books. Gasp. I also read in addition to seeing movies. And I'm on Instagram and Threads at eyeoncanon, spelled the same way.
I just saw you got your fancy new High Republic lightsaber.
I wanted to put it in the background, but I couldn't make it stand up right. So we'll have to
Don't break it.
get that
Like,
rigged up for next time.
nobody wants that. All right, and you
First
can find
ever
me at.
legacy lightsaber, and it's heavy. Those suckers are heavy. I've never had one
They are.
before.
They
Sorry. Yeah.
they are. I have the Ahsoka one. They're heavy to the point where I'm like, am I actually gonna like carry this around with me? Probably not.
Yeah.
Anyway, you can find me at Subchokchai, SOPCHOCKCHAI, on Instagram and Threads, and you can find me at Qui-Gon Jen on Letterboxd. And since PT is not here, we gotta pick up the slack and plug the show one more time. So you can follow us on social media at The Long Take Review. We are mostly on Instagram and Threads, and you can also subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. But we are hosted through Substack, thelongtake.substack.com. And you get a twofer. If you subscribe to the podcast there, you also get all of my written reviews, which I don't know. It's the last week of classes for me. I don't know if I'm going to be able to squeeze out a Doctor Who review, but that's what I'm hoping to do at some point, because that first anniversary episode was really good. But
hey,
so
Doctor Who pod after all 3 specials air. I wouldn't say no.
We should.
We could think about it. All right.
Yeah.
Cool.
Let's do it. I already have Jim Clements, who was on for our indie Dial of Destiny episode. He's a huge Doctor Who fan, and he already has been like, "Are you doing a Doctor Who episode?" so yeah, there's interest, there's demand. We can do it. Well, thanks, Greg, for a great conversation.
Thank you.
About an unsettling and yet very good movie. And thanks everybody for listening. Thank you for listening. You can follow The Long Take on Substack at thelongtake.substack.com. Subscribe for free to receive reviews of films with Oscar buzz, as well as new films and series from pop franchises like Star Wars and Marvel.